Well, hi, everybody. This is Dr. Hanna. Welcome to MedPsych Health. I have two gentlemen with me today, two very special gentlemen. I have Brian Greco and Ron Battiston. And today we're going to talk about the very exciting topic of, are you all ready for this? Fatherhood. We're what, 2 weeks post Father's Day, I think, guys, right?
I believe so.
All right. So I am very excited to have these guys on with me today. And they're both somewhat new dads, and I am not. But for all, in terms of self-disclosure, I'm a father of three with my youngest is middle school age. So they're on a little bit on the younger side, but I'm glad to have them on with me today. And we want to talk about being dads and at the same time as being clinicians who work with kids and what does that mean and kind of what their experience has been like. So guys, are you ready for your first question?
Throw it at us, Mo.
All right. So guys, how did you prepare to become dads?
Ron,
or I shouldn't say that. Hold on. Did you prepare to become dads? Because again, self-disclosure, I didn't do any reading. I didn't do anything. So.
Well, I'll jump in here. So I became very interested in trying to learn about different techniques ahead of time. I think I have been able to live my life as an only child and have never held a baby prior to my own, and was basically a blank slate. So when it came to being a dad, I needed to know everything. So I picked up a few books on baby brain development, on caring for babies, and then I found a really good web series that was helpful with sleep. And basically my wife Michaela and I, we watched that for the preceding weeks up until birth. We also took a couple classes through Valley Hospital, which, were just basically around caring for an infant and just kind of learning all of that stuff. And I found that to be helpful because, again, I didn't know anything about a baby except that you didn't want to shake it and you didn't want it to turn colors or anything like that. But I'd say outside of that, it was all new information for me. So that was my preparation.
Ron, how about you?
Yeah, so I wasn't quite as technocratic about it as Brian was. I certainly did do some preparation. I listened to podcasts. I also did some hospital visits, specifically in terms of the labor and how I could be the best support to my wife in that moment. Because for me, that was more so than even the baby, just making sure I could be the best, co-captain or lieutenant to her, knowing that she was going to be doing most of the heavy lifting. I really...
She did all the heavy lifting?
Maybe that's giving myself a bit too much credit. But really recognizing what can I do to support her, I thought would be very critical. There was some preparation in terms of just understanding key milestones, making sure that I could look out for signs of distress, stuff that, are obvious red flags, so that I could, at that point, alert someone who could, be more of an authority on helping. But I'd say that the thing that I did to prepare most was probably a lot of very deep reflection on my experiences in childhood and growing up, really trying to take inventory on the things that I think my parents did that were extremely well done and helpful to me. And also things that maybe, as an adult now, if I could say this would have gone differently, maybe that would have been helpful. And, I had read a quote that I thought was really helpful for me in terms of how I should prepare for parenthood. And that was to teach your children the things that you learned last to teach them first. And I thought that was a really cool idea and something that was helpful in kind of forming my worldview.
Okay. I realized I misspoke when I said I did not prepare. I did do pediatric rotations in medical school and did go to medical school and had held babies numerous times in nurseries and NICUs. And so I take that back, strike that from the record. All right. So Ron, you kind of just delved right into this and you just kind of said something that I think is really significant. Without whether intentionally or unintentionally, we bring into our role as dads, obviously, the experience we had, right, growing up. And for good or for ill, right? We know that our fathers are imperfect. We know we're going to be imperfect. But can you kind of, I don't know if you're willing, can you tease that out a little bit in terms of what kinds of things we're talking about? In terms of what kinds of things you think you kind of reflected on?
Yeah, I feel like, and I'm sure this is no surprise to you or Brian, but being a parent is an extraordinarily hard and sometimes uh, a job that does not receive as much acclaim or love from your children as maybe you deserve. And I was well aware that for every 99 things that my parents did well, there was probably one thing that they didn't, but perhaps that one thing stands out at times more than the 99, just because that's the way as humans we're sometimes wired to think. And I guess in knowing that there was imperfection that was going to be part of the process of parenthood, it was more for me thinking, on those points when I inevitably do come up short, what can I do to rectify it as best as I'm capable of? And I think for me, that meant making sure that I'm a really good listener, that I'm really good at taking constructive criticism from my partner, from my family, those who have experience, and not pretending that I know it all. Because both as a person with relationships and even as a clinician, some of the challenges that I see that are maybe most significant when it comes to family dynamics are those that involve family members acting stubbornly and not being willing to change if change will sometimes elicit more of a favorable outcome in the entire family dynamic.
If I could just jump in on what
Yeah,
Ron
go
was
ahead.
sharing also, I think for me, one of the things I've been reflecting on a lot and what I've seen in my work has been how important our actions as parents are for our children. So it's sometimes not so much about what we tell our kids, but what they observe with us. So I think when I'm entering into, interactions with my son, I think a lot about that and think about how I want his childhood to kind of, as he looks at me and sees how I conduct myself, what is he seeing, and how does he see me interact with his mother? And obviously, Ron, you kind of highlighted it. Nobody's perfect, and we're going to make some mistakes. We're going to have some missteps, but how do you then work through those situations? I think one great thing I've kind of worked on with families that I see as a therapist, but even try to do in my own life, is if my wife and I have a fight or a disagreement about something, don't try to just hide that from the child, but then also let them see the reconciliation. Let them see how you work through it, because that's also important. And one of the things that I also wanted to do for my son, and I've been trying to make his little bubble, because obviously during COVID, it's been a very, very clear bubble, as happy and as sort of safe for him as it can be. That idea of kind of that holding environment, that safe environment, I felt like was the best thing I could try to give to him during this time.
Just to kind of piggyback a little bit on what you guys said. So Ron, and I think, I don't remember the exact words you said, but a thought came into my mind as you were talking earlier, just about, as men especially, a lot of times I think, boys kind of get raised into, a lot of times focused on jobs and careers and our whole role as being dads, and it's significant, and it is a very significant one, is not talked about, and I don't know if in the culture, perhaps, there's a lot of talk about moms and being a mom, appropriately so, obviously, but our identity as dads, right? And the power to shape is pretty phenomenal. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of studies showing the in a positive way, the presence of a dad in the home, almost every single outcome is better. And that does not mean mom's not important. To me, that's just kind of a given, because mom, to be honest, a lot of times ends up being the primary caretaker when dad's not in the home. But the significance of our role, and especially on the emotional development, is tremendous. Can you guys speak to that a little bit, either from your own experiences so far and even as clinicians, in terms of kind of what you guys see with that specifically?
Yeah, I'll go first, Brian, if it's all the same to you.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
So, I think a lot about what it is that you just said, Mo, in terms of the role and helping to generate the best outcome for my son when it comes to, just his lot in life and how I can serve him. And I think when it comes to fatherhood, it's an interesting thing, because I feel like it's really a concept that's evolved over time. I talk about this a lot with parents who I work with, a lot with men who I work with, and how, 100 years ago, it seemed that the role of father was very primary in meeting basic needs. It was, you provide a roof, you provide food, you protect from danger. And if you did that, like, your job was done. And then generationally speaking, there was an understanding as people evolved, okay, I need to actually be kind. And, I can't.
Crazy. It's crazy.
I can't act like a cretin, and I can't act, aggressively. I need to model what a role model, is, and with more than the previous generation. And I feel like with now this current generation of fathers, there's even more nuance. I feel like there's more of a role to teach about emotions, to access emotions, to model how to convey emotions responsibly, so that they can understand that they can be vulnerable, our sons, and still be strong at the same time. Stuff that's a lot more complex and nuanced than maybe generations have come before.
Yeah, I think so, Ron. I think that was really well said. I think, over time, I think men have had to evolve, and we've had to become more aware of our own vulnerability, more aware of our own emotions. And I think as we try to be role models in 2020, it is more about just being that kind of biological provider. Obviously, some, roles in society have shifted. And I think it's, about being able to be available. When our sons have any type of topic they need to talk with us about, to be available emotionally and being present. And I think having two parents in the home and being able to have equal access to both of those parents, or, whether they're both in the home or not in the home, I think that the access to parents is such a key part of development and such a benefit when it's available to children.
Very good. So if you could put on your clinician hats, I guess it's impossible, by the way, to remove the parenthood hat, right? Once you become a dad, I think that is never removed when you have your clinician hat on. And I actually, and I've said this to my own patients, and I've shared this probably socially with friends, I believe, and it's pretty obvious to me, that the way I practice changed the day my daughter was born. Mm. And I call it my daughter's name is Natalie. I say pre-Natalie and post-Natalie, because I did have the opportunity to be, in practice, taking care of, pediatric patients for about 3 years almost before my daughter, my first child, was born. And I even think just my approach clinically, even to the things I said to parents, was shattered in some ways. And I always felt like that even training, despite training and rigorous training and, medical school residency, fellowship, and all that training and reading and education, it still, there was something about understanding what it means to be a parent and to be responsible for a child, and to just understand that dynamic in a way that I don't think I could have explained to my pre-fatherhood sense. And I'm not trying to diminish people who don't have children and their ability to be good clinicians. That's not my intent at all. I'm just saying, for me, it changed how I practiced. And it changed how just even the things I said. And to be perfectly honest, it's continued to change. The older my children got, and the more challenging as we've entered kind of middle school, high school, years of just watching my children go up and the issues change, that also changes, my perspective as a clinician. It certainly, it gives me a lot of patience and a lot of grace to the parents I work with. But I was curious if you guys could talk about that, or, briefly, in terms of, has it changed, has it changed how you practice or how you do your work?
I think prior to having, a child, there was an understanding I felt like I had about parenthood. I think you can understand things in the same way you can understand a person's traumatic experience, in the sense of, and by the way, I'm not comparing parenthood to trauma in the exact way, but the idea of you don't necessarily need to have that exact experience to understand what a person might be going through is something I think that's fundamental to doing our work. But I do think now being able to relate in a way, and understanding in a different way that experience of what it is like to have a child has definitely impacted me. I also think that hearing about parents' experience with their child not sleeping, or what it feels like when their child has been sick, is something that definitely has been extremely difficult for me to see those things happen. Having a baby that you can't get to sleep through the night is an experience that you can hear about and understand what that might be like, but to actually experience it definitely does change you. And I think having a sick child, and again, I've only even experienced minor illnesses so far, thankfully, but at least it's given me a sense of what that kind of challenge is like for a parent, to see a child who's not well or sick, and can only imagine and try to relate to what it must feel like when parents have to deal with something even more significant. So I do think it's helped me to evolve as a person. And then again, I think the more experiences you have as a person makes you a better therapist, for sure, a better clinician.
Yeah, I think Brian brought up a lot of really good points there. And, to just go in a slightly separate direction with that question. I'd worked with children, adolescents, young adults for 10 years before the birth of my son. And interestingly enough, while my technique and my style has really not changed all that much, I do feel, and I'm curious what you guys feel, that it's kind of legitimized me in the eyes of some of the people I work with a little bit more. My repetitions, I have thousands of hours of repetitions dealing with a set of problems that I, at this point, can do on autopilot. And yet to be able to say, oh yeah, I have a son at home, I think has really shaped the way that I'm perceived by a lot of the people I work with, both clients who I've worked with before for years, and also new ones who come to consult with me in a much different way. And that's been something that I've certainly noticed, and I think is, bears mention.
It's almost like a credibility piece, I think, in a way. Like, you kind of have that additional part of you that your patients now know about and clients know about, and it does change. I've definitely, and maybe Ron, you had this experience, Mo, maybe you did as well, of parents saying to you, well, you don't understand, you don't have a kid. I think that is something that some people will say, and, sort of like your automatic repetition, I felt like I had a pretty good response to that, right? I would say something like, well, I can understand human experiences without living it, but it is easier to kind of be, like I said, a little bit more relatable maybe in those moments. I do think gives people a bit of, maybe a comfort that you can't really, you can't replace. It's just a different kind of thing.
I agree.
I'm sorry, Mo. A thing that I found that's been interesting too, Brian, is also, yes, with parents that matters, but with the 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, 12-year-olds I work with too, for them to know that I have a baby, that excites them maybe more than the parents, and that almost
good point
legitimizes me more with them. And that's something that I don't think I quite anticipated or expected prior to this.
No, I bring up my kids all the time during appointments, both with the parents and the kids. I don't do it to, to get credibility. It's because I think it's natural. I share my experiences as a parent, including some of, my challenges and failures. And I do it because I think it's in the best interest of who I'm talking to. And to be honest, it's, I've always thought that I have a relationship with the parents I work with, and I'm in the same boat as them. And I've probably said this a lot to people I work with, to my patients. I said, listen, I'm not sitting in judgment over you. I'm kind of on a parenting journey as you are, and with its challenges and with its ups and downs, and that, kids don't come with manuals, and that I think just for them to know that it's not that we are somehow superior to them in our ability, to parent. But at the same time, we kind of have obviously our training and our experience as clinicians that we bring to the table. So, but I also think the other piece is it's kind of the empathy piece. I know that has changed dramatically as a result of being a parent, of recognizing, wow, again, having 3 kids of my own, that when your son or daughter is struggling, wow, how hard that is and how disruptive that is, and just the stress it puts on parents that we see is ungodly. I think that, because we operate in the mental health sphere, I think, and I've had plenty of parents say this, and they were not trying to be mean, but they said it would be easier if my kid had cancer. That's pretty jarring, right? When some of the, the families that I take care of, that I've taken care of for years, that's pretty jarring. It's like, wow, it's that stressful. And then just having that parent hat and knowing what that's like, I think certainly impacts how we respond and, how we interact. So any other thoughts on this before we kind of move on to some other things?
I just wanted to add, I think ultimately the best way to do our work is to be genuine. And, there are times when we use self-disclosure and there's times when we don't. But I think when I do use self-disclosure, it's always genuine, it's honest. And I think that connection among people is what people are drawn to. So whatever goes on in my life, good, bad, otherwise, will end up becoming a part of the work that I do. And parenthood has provided me with a wealth of additional experiences to share.
What do you guys think has been the toughest part? What's been the hardest part of being a dad?
Sleep.
Okay.
Sleep, even though I prepared as much as I could, I think, and we have a very great sleeper for the most part. I definitely think the nights when he is not sleeping well, and it's, I actually am coming off of a night where he did not sleep well, so that's probably why it's on my mind so easily. I think those nights make it harder to dial in mentally the next day. Requires an extra cup of coffee. It requires an extra few moments sitting in meditation or silence and getting your head right, and needing to still be present for the people that I work with who, pay me good money to be their therapist and expect me to be at my best. And I hold myself to that standard. So I think the nights when sleep has been most difficult, where I'm up 3-4 times, or, it's, that's become the most challenging part.
I think for me, it's been the moments where I've had to wrestle with the reality of parenthood not matching my previous expectations. I think when we're growing up, we live in a society where we're told we're supposed to feel a certain type of way at every turn or milestone. And oftentimes it's very romanticized what we're supposed to feel. Everything when it comes to parenthood, prior to, when you're there is, this is going to be magical. This is going to be magical. This is going to be, and it's not always. And I've had moments where something that people have said, this is supposed to be a magical or experience, or a very, warm and, without any kind of condition, just positive experience, has been stressful, or it's been difficult, or it's been taxing on me. And it hasn't been as clean cut a positive emotion as maybe the expectation was. So for me, it's had to rectify that my unique journey of parenthood doesn't match what maybe, I thought it would have been prior to being in that moment.
Yeah, and that's wow, what a great point, Ron, because the fact is it's rarely magical. It's not true. I think a lot of times so many of our ideas, whether it's about being a dad or marriage for that matter, are not based in reality, right? They're not based in truth. They're not based on what actually happens in real life. They're fantasized. And I actually think, kind of similar to what you just said, they set you up. They set you up for disappointment. They set you up for, where what you thought is supposed to happen doesn't happen. I see this a lot of times in conversations with people about marriages, where people are like, well, I don't like, I don't love my spouse anymore. This is not what I thought it was going to be like. And I'd be like, well, what did you think it was going to be? Did you think it was just going to be, like whatever, whatever fantasy idea? Yeah, just kind of like some fictional idea that's not based in reality. I said, marriage is hard work, right? When you have two imperfect human beings married to each other, that's hard work. And then you bring in an imperfect child into the mix of imperfect people. It's hard work, right? Our selfishness comes out, our pride gets in the way, our own kind of learned emotional behaviors and tendencies, and right? It's hard work. It does require a lot of self-awareness, certainly. And I think that's one of the, I'm gonna, and I was gonna ask you guys that, that was my question, but for me, I think one of the biggest things I see is that I'm much more self-aware of my own emotions, of just, and I recognize when I screw up, or when I misspeak or I overreact, much more than I ever did before I had children or before I got married, for that matter. And again, some of that is just, we mature as we get older. And as guys, we tend to mature a little bit later. Our frontal lobes lack behind our wives, I'm sure. Hopefully now we're all at the age where we've kind of caught up, but so in terms of that, what have you guys seen in yourselves when it comes to that?
You want to take that one, Ron?
Sure. So Mo, you're asking, like, now that we're here, and we're in the moment of parenthood, what is it that, like, we're observing about ourselves?
Yeah. Like, what are you learning about yourselves?
It's a great question.
I try. I try to ask great questions.
To be kinder to myself is one that's actually really emerged, not even just for the sake of me, but I know that if I might have been one who is prone to criticism or, deep reflection on, my things where I may have come up short, that the consequence of me not handling that well extends beyond another well-adjusted adult, that there's a child in the home and I need to model certain experiences in a really mature kind of way, because I am the primary person, and will be for a long time, with whom, along with my wife, he develops his personality and his opinions and his temperament. And I know that by being good to me and making sure I'm taking time to be kind to me and get myself in the best possible headspace, it's not just good for me, it's good for my family at large.
I think it's been the most challenging but also rewarding experience trying to do this experience of parenthood with my wife, and having this be almost like a new challenge for us. We had been together for 6 years prior to having a child, and I felt like we had gotten pretty good at being the two of us. And maybe, we were at a really great point. And, I had read a statistic that within the first year of having a child, 90% of couples report a decrease in happiness in their relationship. Mm. And
I thought it was, I'm saying how because I thought it was 100. I thought it would have been 100.
So the study I saw said 90. It probably is 100.
Okay.
And I think, well, the 90 was more helpful because for me, I said it in my head. I was like, I'm not going to let myself not be in that 10%, my own sort of striving for reaching for the stars kind of goal. And I think it has been a real challenge for us at times to keep our level of communication, to manage when situations arise that are different than anything we've ever had to go through before. And I think the, level of having to, recognize my own shortcomings at times and recognizing the moments when I'm not found at my best and try to kind of work through those times, because you can't really take breaks. And one of the challenges too, again, I know we're filming this in the midst of the COVID-19. It's July 3rd and we've been dealing with this since March, and my wife and I are both working from home full time. We lost having grandparents coming down and staying a day or two to help. And it's been all on us. My wife had to cut her maternity leave short and go back. So we've been just, it's been the sharing of my calendar with my wife, which I never had to do before, having to be very meticulous about the time slots that I schedule my clients. And I was a therapist when, prior to this, you could pretty much text me any morning and I would find a time for you and fit you in. And now I'm really trying to be more like, no, I can't. And that's been a real shift for me, having to really account for, two other people who rely on me. If I'm supposed to be watching my son, I have to, plan around these things. And that's new. And that's been a big shift for me.
All right, last question. So what advice would you give pre-fatherhood you?
Pre-fatherhood me. Echoing on Ron's point about it's not all magical, I think remembering to just be present through the whole experience and try your best to enjoy those moments you have to their fullest when it's just you and your wife and you before the baby. I think I remember trying to think that way, and I wish I thought of it even more, I think, because it is a radical change. And I think, we joke about the fact that we won't be just the two of us again until who knows when. With the way kids are staying in their homes with their parents till their 20s, it might be a very long time. And I think just continuing to really reflect and feel grateful for the moments you have before, and then sort of just trying to remain fully present through the whole experience.
Yeah, I think for me, it's similar to Brian, where, I think when we reach certain milestones in our life, certain ages, plateaus, we kind of reflect on where we've been, and maybe we say to ourselves, I wish I would have appreciated that moment a little bit more. And I think once you have a child, it is a resetting of the chessboard, and a chance not only to have a new rewarding and challenging, component to your life, but also an opportunity to maybe learn from the things that had happened prior to now. And I guess what I would tell myself is slow down in those moments, those really good moments. I think like every parent, when he's crying or he's, soiled through his sheets or, and you just want to say, I wish this wouldn't be happening. To try and not take it for granted, because there is going to be a time where I am not going to be able to hold him and be the center of his world. And that moment is probably going to come sooner than I can even anticipate. And I anticipate that in that moment, I will have wished with all my being that I could have it back. So to try and really slow down, and in those moments, exert every last ounce of joy from it would be the thing that I would let myself know. Go in, remember that.
Well, thank you guys. I think this was really good. I think you guys had some great insights, and the interesting thing, of course, and this is obvious, we're all still on this journey, it doesn't stop. I think when our kids are adults, this never stops, right? As long as we're alive, we don't stop being dads to our children. And it'll be interesting to see, I think, for all of us as our kids get older, perhaps we can revisit this, maybe a couple years from now, and kind of go through some of these questions again and kind of see if our answers are still the same. So